Welcome back to another Eldorado Gaming Deck Tech. Eldorado Gaming provides premier game accessories like dice and playmats. You can find them at eldoradogaming.com. They also have a podcast called My Mythical Meta, where they discuss strategies for maintaining a healthy game group. These deck techs feature some of the decks played by the My Mythical Meta crew. And if you want to know what they're playing and their thought process when deck building, subscribe for more. And of course, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe with your own suggestions at the end of the video. Okay, my name is Travis. I am one of the My Mythical Meta guys, and today I'm going to be going over one of my commander decks for Magic the Gathering, and that commander is Ovika Enigma Goliath. Ovika Enigma Goliath is an Is-It commander from the Phyrexia All Will Be One set. I fell in love with this commander as soon as I saw it. It is a nightmare that creates goblin tokens. Lots and lots of goblin tokens. Let's take a look at Ovika's abilities to start us off. First of all, it's a 6/6 flying for 7 mana. Love it. No problem with that. You can put your opponents on a quick clock with that. Second, it's got Ward. Not only 3 mana, but they must also pay 3 life. In Commander, the life may not be a big deal, but having Ward 3 is a huge deal. It turns a Swords to Plowshares from a 1 mana removal spell to a 4 mana. We love increasing that rate and making it really hard to remove. In the games that I've played with Ovika, I warn my team, or I warn my playgroup, and I warn strangers that you have to save removal for Ovika if you want to overcome this deck. Its last ability says, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create X 1/1 red Phyrexian goblin creature tokens, where X is the mana value of that spell. They gain haste until end of turn. So you can use these goblins immediately. As soon as they come onto the field, you can start swinging with them. Also, note that it only says non-creature spell. Unlike a lot of other Is-It commanders, this is not limited to instants and sorceries. You can do any type of non-creature spell that you want. My build does have a lot of instants and sorceries, but there's no shortness of enchantments and artifacts throughout this deck too, because anything can make those goblins, not just instants and sorceries. Now, Ovika Enigma Goliath costs 7, so it's going to take a huge ramp package. You can see from my categories in Archidect that I have 22 cards in my deck that I have categorized as ramp. Now, they have various abilities throughout, but all of these can help me generate mana and help me cast spells. I have so many because I've got to get Ovika out, and I need to get Ovika out soon. The rest of this deck is based on having goblins to spend, whether I'm attacking or sacrificing them or throwing them at my opponents. I've got to have goblins out, and Ovika is my only goblin creator. So that's my one reason to have a huge ramp package. I want my opening hand to have 3 or 4 pieces of ramp so that I can get to 7 as fast as possible. But secondly, these cards aren't dead after Ovika is out. They all still make goblins. Okay, Arcane Signet is an artifact. It only costs 2, and it creates 1 mana. Well, even if I'm already at 7 mana and Ovika's already out, this isn't a dead card in hand. I can still cast it, make 2 goblins. And the same is true for the rest. I'm going to do a rundown of all of my ramp spells and describe why I think they're valuable. Arcane Signet costs 2, makes 1 mana of any color. Pretty standard deal. Ashnod's Altar, another great spell. It costs 3. Sacrifice a creature, add 2 to your mana pool. The goblins that I'm making are expendable. We use them like a currency in order to spend on various effects, and Ashnod's Altar is only one of those ways. I can spend a goblin to add 2 more mana to my mana pool. And you'll see as I get to some of my big spells and other effects that every goblin being worth mana, that's just a huge benefit in any type of token deck that you're working with like these. Commander Sphere costs 3, makes 1 mana. I have it in my ramp pool, but never forget that Commander Sphere can be sacrificed to draw a card. This is great if somebody is going to Vandal Blast your board and destroy all your artifacts. You can always get a card off of Commander Sphere before it's gone. Decanter of Endless Water is a great new one. I think it came from the Baldur's Gate set because it is a Thought Vessel or a Reliquary Tower. It taps for mana of any color, but it also increases your maximum hand size so that you have no limit. This deck, if it gets into Magical Christmas Land, can easily draw 20, 50 cards at a time. And you never want to be in the situation where you got to discard. It's always nice to just say, all of these options are mine and I can keep them forever. Cost 3, so even after Ovika's already out, it's not a dead card. It's going to make me 3 more goblins. Dreamstone Hedron is one of the more expensive. A lot of people don't add this into decks anymore. It's kind of been outclassed. It costs 6, makes 3 colorless mana, and you can tap it and sacrifice it to draw 3 cards. Now, say Ovika's already out, I don't need any more mana rocks. This is still going to get me 6 goblins. This is still 6 damage on turn. Whether I can Goblin Bombardment and fling those goblins out, or maybe these 6 goblins are worth 12 mana through Ashnod's Altar. It doesn't matter that this is a dead card or that it's expensive. I've got the ramp to power it out, and even after Ovika's out, it's still worth 6 goblins. Every single card in this pile just becomes dragon fodder, or the other goblin summoning spells where pay 6, get 6 goblins. That's an incredible rate, so all of these are fine. Everflowing Chalice starts at 0, but has multi-kicker for 2. You can pay 2 any number of times, and it'll come in with that number of charge counters, and then it'll tap for that number of colorless mana. It is another Dreamstone Hedron. It's another Hedron Archive, where I can pay 4 for a 2 mana rock, or I can pay 2 for a 1 mana rock, or I can pay 6 for a 3 mana. Everflowing Chalice is just really flexible, and I can use it no matter where on curve I'm at. Felwar Stone, tap 2, create 1 mana of any color that an opponent can control. Gilded Lotus, costs 5, add 3 mana of any 1 color. I have Goblin Electromancer. This is one of the 2 creatures in this deck. I only have 2 creatures besides the commander, and Goblin Electromancer is one of them. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. It's just going to make all of your instants and sorceries, which is all of our win cons and all of our big spells, it's just going to make those come out a little sooner and be just a little easier to cast. I mentioned Hedron Archive earlier, costs 4, taps for 2, and I can tap and sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. If you're ever in the situation where you don't have one of these card draw engines that I'll get to in a little bit later, Dreamstone Hedron, Hedron Archive, Mind Stone is one that I have also. You can use these to draw more cards to try to hit your win conditions. Is it Signet? Costs 2. You have to pay 1, tap it, add blue and red. Jace's Sanctum is an enchantment. Doesn't matter. It's a non-creature spell. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you scry 1. This is a great effect. It's going to help me select better cards. I mentioned Mind Stone earlier. Pay 2, taps for 1. You can pay 1, tap it, and sacrifice it to draw a card. Again, I know it's simple, but I like these cards because whenever they get Vandal Blasted, I can just exchange them in for a card instead. I've got Primal Amulet in this deck as well. It has the same instant and sorcery spells you cast, cost 1 less to cast effect, but it has a flip condition. If it has 4 or more charge counters on it, which you get from casting instants or sorceries, then you can transform it into Primal Wellspring. This is a land, so it is still ramp. I'm still up whatever land count I was at. And if I spend that mana on an instance or sorcery, then I can copy it. I can copy that spell. So this is a great effect for an instant or sorcery spell-slinging deck, which most Izzet decks dissolve into anyway. I've got Prismatic Lens. The mana filtering effect has never really been necessary. This is only a 2-color deck, but it still comes in on 2 and taps for 1. So this is still a great rate, just like an Arcane Signet or a Mind Stone. I do have a Sapphire Medallion in this deck. I managed to pull this card once it got on the list. So I felt really lucky to pull one of these Medallion cards once it got added to the list into various booster packs. Your blue spells cost 1 less to play. This deck is primarily blue. I really like Archidect because it has some color distribution charts that come along with it once everything in your deck is in. And you can see outer is my mana costs. This deck is primarily blue. It has 52 blue pips throughout and only 15 red pips. So I need access to all of my blue spells. Sapphire Medallion is going to make them easier to cast. I, of course, have a Soul Ring. This is your best mana rock in Commander. I have a Talisman of Creativity here. I managed to get mine in the Baldur's Gate set. And it's the same as your Mind Stone Prismatic Lens is a Signet category. Comes in on 2, generates 1 mana. I think this is a great rate. And remember that even once Ovika is out, they will still create 2 goblins for me. So every single one of them is useful. I did move in the Golden Throne. I moved in the Golden Throne into this deck. This is a card from the 40k pre-constructed decks, the Warhammer 40k decks. It costs 4, and it has life support. If you would lose the game, instead exile the Golden Throne, and your life total becomes 1. I've never had to use that before, but I'm sure that once I do, I'll be really glad it's there. The reason I have the Golden Throne in this deck is for this second effect. I can tap it, sacrifice a creature, and add 3 mana in any combination of colors. This deck has quite a few color requirements. There are cards with 2 and 3 colored pips in their cost, and I certainly have been in the situation where all of my lands were tapped, but I still had plenty of creatures to sacrifice. The Golden Throne helps me turn a goblin into 3 colored mana, and that has been a really great use. I would put my Phyrexian Altar in this deck, but my Phyrexian Altar is in a different deck, and I only have 1, so I decided to throw in the Golden Throne as kind of my budget option for Phyrexian Altar. You know, we have Phyrexian Altar at home. It's called the Golden Throne. I've got a Thought Vessel in here. 2 mana, add 1, and no maximum hand size. I have a Thran Dynamo. 4 mana, add 3. And a Worn Power Stone. 3 mana, add 2. Again, 22 ramp pieces in this deck. We've got to get Ovika out as fast as possible. If Ovika gets removed, we need the mana to recast it. This deck simply doesn't work without the commander making goblins for us. All of these artifacts and enchantments are not dead after Ovika's out. Each one of them is going to generate more goblins for us, with the exception of Goblin Electromancer. So, once I've got Ovika out, and the ramp in my hand is spent, I need to be able to continue drawing cards. I need to see more of the deck because I need to get to my big spells and my win conditions. Big spells are how this deck is going to win. Ovika creates goblins based on the mana value of the non-creature spell. So I need to get Ovika out, and I need to cast cards that cost 7, 8, 9 mana. I need to start casting those big spells, and I've got to draw them. And that's what my card draw engine is all about. I do only have 10 cards that I qualified as card draw, but don't forget that Commander Sphere, what were the other ones? Hedron Archive, Dreamstone Hedron. I can always get a second influx of cards from some of those cards that I have in my ramp category. But let's take a look at the cards in my card draw package. I have the second creature in this deck, and that's the only two, Goblin Electromancer and Archmage Emeritus. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. A great way to turn every card into your hand into a cantrip and to be constantly refueling and drawing more and more. I was very lucky to pull Archmage Emeritus in packs. I call it luck, but for some reason the cost for Strixhaven booster boxes has always been pretty low. Basically, when Strixhaven came out, my local shop did a sale for $80 for a full booster box of Archmage Emeritus set boosters. So $80 to get a full set, to get a full booster box. That's what I did. Some shops still have Strixhaven booster boxes for low prices like that, so it's not impossible for you to still get yours. Of course, you could also pay $5 and get it for a single. Archmage Emeritus, 4 mana. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. It's a 2/2. This, like I said, him and Goblin Electromancer are the only creatures in this deck. I don't need any more creatures because Ovika is going to be making goblin tokens for me. I can swing with them, I can block with them, depending on whatever the game requires. But I don't need to be casting other creature spells besides the 2 of them. Bident of Thassa. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. Comes in for 4. It creates 4 hasty goblins. I can swing those goblins out, and I could maybe even draw 2 or 3, maybe even 4 cards on the same turn I play the Bident. So this is going to get me cards as soon as it's out. It's also a non-creature. It's an enchantment, artifact, but not a creature. So it's going to make me 4 goblins. Okay, let's talk Kindred Discovery. This card is absolutely insane in this deck. It is completely nuts. Costs 5 mana. As Kindred Discovery enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. We are going to choose Phyrexian or Goblin. It doesn't really quite matter. Phyrexian or Goblin. Either one is fine because the goblins that Ovika creates are both. Goblin Electromancer is not Phyrexian, but is a goblin. However, Ovika itself is Phyrexian, so kind of just depends on what you're feeling. But here is where it goes absolutely nuts. Whenever a creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield or attacks, draw a card. So, if Ovika is out on the battlefield, and I cast an Arcane Signet, well, this is a non-creature. It's going to grant me 2 goblins. Kindred Discovery is going to see 2 goblins enter the battlefield, and I'm going to draw 2 cards. Yes, you heard correctly. It's absolutely insane. Now I'm going to play Gilded Lotus. I'm going to create 5 goblins, and I'm going to draw 5 cards. Every card in the deck now is going to draw me cards equal to the mana value of that spell. Kindred Discovery is absolutely nuts. Also, those goblins have haste, and so whenever they attack, I draw a card. It's absolute insanity to see how many cards I can draw with Kindred Discovery. This is an absolute bomb in this deck. And once Kindred Discovery hits, if you can manage to find it, you won't have card draw problems for the rest of the game. The next one with the multiverse, I like it because it costs 8. I can look at the top card of my library at any time, and I can play lands and cast spells from the top of my library. I really like effects like this, because they basically say, when you play a spell, draw a card. If I play that spell that's on top of my library, well, now it's gone, and now I can look at the top card there. I can treat that top card as if it's in my hand. So I like multiverse, one with the multiverse a lot. Also, it has a ability worth 8 mana. Once during each of your turns, you may cast a spell from your hand or the top of your library without paying its mana cost. I can cast one of these 7, 8, 9 mana spells without paying for it. And that doesn't change the number of goblins that I get from casting that spell. I've got Reconnaissance Mission. This is basically a second By Dint of Thassa. Whenever a creature I control deals combat damage to a player, I can draw a card. So it's going to come in, create 4 goblins. I can immediately swing with them because they have haste, and I can start drawing some more cards and try to refill my hand. If I'm in a really bad position, maybe it's early game and I did not have enough ramp in my opening hand, well, then I can cycle Reconnaissance Mission to try to hit a land or to try to hit a ramp spell. I really like Reconnaissance Mission with that cycling ability. I do have Coastal Piracy, which is another copy of Recon Mission, but it's in a different deck, and so that's why it's not in this deck. Skull Clamp. Skull Clamp is another insane card draw engine for this deck. This is no surprise. People have been using Skull Clamp for the last decade to draw cards. Pay 1, and then you can equip it for 1. Equipped creature gets +1/-1. Well, the goblins that I'm making are 1/1 creatures, so that means as soon as it gets clamped, it dies, and I can draw 2 cards. So that's still great. If I can turn a creature that I got for free into 2 cards for 1 mana, that's a really great deal. I have Staff of Nin in this deck. It costs 6 mana. At the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card. So now I'm drawing 2 cards per turn instead of only 1. I don't know if I would include it in this deck if that were it, but it does have an activated ability. I can tap Staff of Nin, and it deals 1 damage to any target. I know that seems dumb, but for some reason in my meta, this is worth a lot more than a lot of people might think it is. I can remove somebody's elf blocker. I can ping somebody for 1 in the face in order to put them into lethal range. Like there's no downside to having an ability that lets me tap and deal 1 damage. It costing 6 was not a downside in this particular deck. I have the ramp that allows me to get up to 6 without a problem, and I can pay for it and generate 6 goblins. A lot of people might probably think that Staff of Nin is too expensive for what it does. After all, a Phyrexian Arena only costs 3 in order to get me that extra card per turn, but I don't mind paying 6 in this particular deck. I've got Stolen Strategy. It doesn't particularly let me see my own cards. I'll go ahead and read Stolen Strategy here. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of each opponent's library. Until end of turn, you may cast spells from among those exiled cards, and you can spend mana as though it were mana of any color. It doesn't let me see more of my own cards, but it does let me use what my opponents had coming up. I have found effects like this to be really useful. Because if my opponent flips up Swords to Plowshares, or if my opponent flips up Cultivate, or if my opponent flips up a really huge threat, I can steal it from them. I can take it from them because my ramp package has enabled me to generate as much mana as I need to. It costs 5. That means it's going to get me 5 goblins. So I really like effects like this that let me steal cards from my opponent's libraries. Treasure Cruise, a straight draw 3 cards. Now, it costs 8, 7 and a blue, but it has Delve. Each card you exile from your graveyard while casting this spell pays for 1. So I can get rid of cards from my graveyard in order to lower that casting cost. Why do I keep it in this deck? Because it costs 8, and that's going to make me 8 goblins. That's going to make me 8 goblin tokens that I can swing with. It's a sorcery. That means that all of my instant and sorcery cards, things that care about instants and sorcery, they're going to care about Treasure Cruise. So it costs 8, it draws me 3, and it's going to make me 8 goblins if Ovika is out. Wiretapping is my last one. This is a card from New Capenna. It costs 5, 4 and a blue, and it has Hideaway 5. This mechanic means that whenever it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 5 cards of your library, and then you exile one of them, and you put the rest in the bottom. So you tuck one of those cards underneath Wiretapping. Whenever you draw your first card during each of your draw steps, draw a card. Then, if you have 9 or more cards in hand, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So, I have several effects that give me no maximum hand size. I've got Decanter of Endless Water. I have Thought Vessel. And I also have Reliquary Tower, which is one of the lands that says you have no maximum hand size. So I have 2 or 3 ways to have no maximum hand size and to be able to hit Hideaway. Hitting Hideaway is not super important, playing that exiled card. What I need is a way to draw a bonus card each turn. So that is my card draw package. Again, Kindred Discovery is absolute insanity in this deck. I would say that the other major players are Bident of Thassa, Recon Mission, and, of course, Skull Clamp. These cards are going to help me get that influx of cards rather than just the 1 extra card per turn, or the 1 card that you draw per turn. Having so many goblins, being able to swing in with them, no matter what that means, maybe I need to get around my opponent's big creature by sending 3 or 4 or 5 goblins, or somebody's not running any blockers and I can just swing 1 in or 2. Those goblins are going to be what draws me cards from Bident of Thassa and Recon Mission. Okay, so now I have my card draw going, and those are going to help me hit my big spells and my win conditions. But we have to survive. I need to survive in between that step. I've kind of built into my mid game here. My early game is all ramp. My mid game is drawing cards, and now I just need to survive until the end. I have 2 categories here, protection and removal. I consider counter spells like removal also. If it's a big enough threat, then I can remove it before it impacts the battlefield. But I like putting them under protection too. The general school of thought that I use for counter spells is if that spell is going to make me lose the game, then I'll counter it. Otherwise, you usually kind of let it through, because if it's big enough and there are still other players, then that threat might be turned towards them. It might not be killing me as soon as it hits. It might be a future me problem rather than an immediate counterspell problem. So I need to survive until I can hit my big spells and win cons. So I've got a suite of counterspells and removal options that I'll go through here. Again, for this particular deck, I don't mind more expensive counterspells. I've got the ramp package to hit them, and each time I cast them, I'm still going to get goblins. That is still what's so amazing about Ovika, is that with all of these, I'm still going to get more creatures. I'm going to get more goblin tokens. If I'm playing these instants on an opponent's turn, that means I have surprise blockers that they weren't prepared for. Access denied costs 5. It says counter target spell. I create X 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying, where X is that spell's mana value. So access denied is going to be great in this deck because I'll pay 5, I'll get 5 goblins, and then I'll also get enough Thopters, however many Thopters the card that I countered costs. Usually, if somebody plays a spell that's worth more than 5, then I'm going to feel really great about an access denied. I'm going to feel like I absolutely got my money's worth, got my mana's worth. An offer you can't refuse. This has been an all-star in our meta, something we're always looking out for. This is just an uncommon from New Capenna. It costs only 1 blue, and you can counter target non-creature spell. So, oh man, I played out a bunch of big stuff, and I only had 1 blue left. I really couldn't afford to do anything else. Not until they try something on their own turn and you have an offer you can't refuse. You pay 1 and say, nope, I'm sorry, that didn't happen, and you give them 2 treasure tokens instead. This has always been worth it to me. This has always been a really great card. I do have regular counterspell in here. Blue, counter target spell. Airtie's Scorn. This is a uncommon from Dominaria United. It costs blue, and 1. It costs 3 for counter target spell. Not usually the rate we want. We don't usually want to go with the rate for cancel. But it says this spell costs a blue less to cast if an opponent has cast 2 or more spells this turn. That means I can cast it for 2, still get 3 goblins. Still get 3 because its mana value is still 3, even if I've paid less. All of these counterspells you can count as protection or removal. This next one, Fool's Demise, is definitely a protection card. It costs 5 mana, 4 and a blue. It's an enchant creature aura. Still a non-creature, I'm still going to get 5 goblins from it. When enchanted creature dies, return that card to the battlefield under your control. And when Fool's Demise is put into the graveyard, return it to its owner's hand. Making opponents sacrifice creatures is a popular way in my meta, in my group, of getting rid of really troublesome creatures. There's nothing on Ovika that says I can't sacrifice him. Now, hopefully, I have enough goblins to make it so that I never have to get to Ovika, but if it happens, Fool's Demise is a card that I could enchant Ovika with, and it wouldn't matter. If somebody manages to get Ovika, then, or goes through his ward, or goes through whatever they need to get rid of Ovika, if I have Fool's Demise, Ovika can come right back, and Fool's Demise is going to come straight to my hand. I can cast it again, get 5 more goblins. So it's a self-protecting, self-copying way of protecting Ovika and keeping Ovika on the field. I've got Narset's Reversal here. This is a rare from War of the Spark. I pulled this in a pack whenever I was playing that set. So it costing $750, that was never really an issue for me. I pulled it in packs. As I discussed in my last deck tech, and as you'll probably hear in most of them, I spend too much on packs. Gambling is part of the joy that I get from this game. And I don't usually buy singles unless they're in an affordable rate. So, Narset's Reversal, a really fun spell. Blue, copy target instant or sorcery spell, then return it to its owner's hand. You may choose new targets for the copy. I have done this to myself, to copy my own Surge to Victory so that I can recast it alone. I have done this to myself to cast a second time Amanatu's Augury. But of course, you can use it to get rid of your opponent's stuff as well, to deny them something for 1 turn while you get your first crack. Sudden Substitution. This came from a Commander set, Commander 19. Ooh, this card, chef's kiss. It has Split Second. which means it can't be countered. Other people can't cast spells while this card is on the stack. It costs 4. I'm going to get 4 goblins from it. And here's what matters. Exchange control of target non-creature spell and target creature. Then the spell's controller may choose new targets for it. So like Narset's Reversal, if somebody else casts something really good, I can steal it by casting Sudden Substitution. Ovika says, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create the Phyrexian Goblins. So that means I can cast Sudden Substitution, and even if I had no goblins on the field before, I will have 4 of them when I cast it, and then I can target them with Sudden Substitution. I can give somebody else a 1/1 goblin in exchange for whatever non-creature spell they cast. So Sudden Substitution is a really nice effect for this deck. A great way to steal somebody's great card. I also have Urza's Rebuff. It's just a better cancel because it has this second effect. So blue 1 counter target spell. That's cancel. Again, 3 mana for a counter is not usually what we want, but it does have a second effect. Tap up to 2 target creatures. I can use this to help get in with my goblins. Or say my opponent has a flying blocker. Well, I can tap it down, still get in with Ovika, or I can tap down somebody's, 2 of somebody's creatures and get in with my swarm of goblins either way. This is just, I like the versatility on Urza's Rebuff. It costs 3, and it's going to give me 3 goblins that I can use also. That was what I consider my protection category. Like I said, these counter spells could also be counted as removal, but let's take a look at specifically my removal category now too. I have Defabricate, which costs blue and 1. Counter target artifact or enchantment spell. If a spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. Or I can counter target activated or triggered ability. So that means this has a stifle effect on it, but much more often I have used Defabricate to counter my opponent's early game ramp. If they play an early Soul Ring or an early Thought Vessel, and I manage to have a blue and 1 open because I didn't do anything on turn 2 or because I ramped up to it, that's going to put me in a great position to say, instead of going a turn where I could do nothing, I can spend 2 mana to counter somebody else's early game ramp and keep them behind. That way they don't catch up to me. Artifact or enchantment spell. So if somebody's got Wild Growth or Overgrowth, one of those other green ramp enchantments, I can use Defabricate for that too. Hitting artifacts and enchantments, I have found, has been a really powerful way to do this. Divergent Transformations. This is from Commander 16, and this is an all-star card in this particular deck. It costs 6 and a red, but it has Undaunted. That means it costs 1 less to cast for each opponent. If I have 3 other opponents in a 4-player game, then that means this card is only going to cost 4 mana. Or, it's only going to cost 4 instead of 7 mana. But remember that doesn't change this spell's mana value. I'm still going to get 7 goblins from casting Divergent Transformations, rather than only getting the number that I paid for. There are lots of reasons Divergent Transformations is really good. First, it exiles 2 target creatures. Exile is great. It's better than Destroy because it gets rid of something permanently. You never have to deal with it again, except in special circumstances. You exile 2 target creatures. For each of those creatures, its controller reveals cards from the top of his library until he or she reveals a creature card, and they put that card onto the battlefield. So it's kind of like a Chaos Warp effect. You get rid of a creature, but then they're going to get another creature. You just don't know what it is. The really cool tech that I've done in my Ovika deck is, remember, I only have 2 creatures in the deck. I have Goblin Electromancer, a ramp piece that makes my instant and sorcery spells cost 1 less, and then I have Archmage Emeritus, a card draw engine. Whenever I cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, I can draw a card. Well, with Divergent Transformations, I can take 2 of my Goblin tokens, exile them, and then flip through my entire deck to hit only these 2 creatures, Goblin Electromancer and Archmage Emeritus. This card has been an incredible all-star in this deck. It makes 7 goblins, and then I can use it on my opponents to get rid of their troublesome creatures, albeit at the risk of them getting something else good. Or I can use it for myself in order to automatically search out my only 2 creatures, my Goblin Electromancer and my Archmage Emeritus. There is quite a few spell copying in this deck. I have, where are they? Reinterpret, Swarm Intelligence, Double Vision, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So I have copied and recurred Divergent Transformations before in order to really pick apart my opponent's board. It costs 7, so it's having that high mana value is really great for this deck. All-Star, Overperformer, Divergent Transformations. Mystic Confluence. I have it in removal, but you could put it in protection or card draw. You can kind of put it in whatever category you want. These confluences have lots of effects. It costs 5, 3 blue. Choose 3. You can choose the same mode more than once. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. Return target creature to its owner's hand, or draw a card. So you can get rid of an opponent's troublesome creature, and then whatever leftover modes you have, you can just draw the cards. You can spend them all to make somebody counter a spell unless they pay 9. It's just a good card, and it costing 5, again, is not a problem in this deck. I have plenty of ramp to hit it, and it's going to make me 5 goblins. I never turn up my nose at rapid hybridization. Destroy target creature, it can't be regenerated, they get a 3/3 green frog. This is just really good. It's my blue Swords to Plowshares. Get rid of 1 problematic creature for 1 mana. Get a goblin. In this case, with the low mana cost, getting the goblin doesn't matter, but I'm not going to say no to it either. Sublime Epiphany costs 6. And like Mystic Confluence, there's just a lot of modes here, and it's just generically really good. You could put this in protection, removal, or anything else. I can use it just to build my board up if I want. Counter target spell. Counter target activated or triggered ability. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Create a token that's a copy of target creature I control. Or target player draws a card. You can pick as many of these modes as you want for 6 mana. Say I have Archmage Emeritus or Goblin Electromancer out. Well, I can make a token to double up on that draw, or double up on that ramp, make my instant and sorcery spells cost 2 less to cast. I'll always draw a card from it. I can counter a spell. I can get rid of something troublesome on board. This is just an all-around great card, has lots of good effects, and it costing 6 just simply isn't a problem for this deck with my 22 pieces of ramp. Okay. Next, we get to winning the game. Protection and removal, we're all about surviving the mid-game until I can draw into my really good cards. So, let's look at my suite of big spells. It doesn't really matter which big spells you choose. You could choose any big spells. Non-creatures, or, instants of sorceries, enchantments, artifacts. You could choose any big spells you want. I just chose these because I had them. They weren't being used in any other decks. And you're going to see from my selection of big spells that this is just an Izzet deck doing Izzet things. I've got Alrund's Epiphany. This is an extra turn spell. It costs 7, and I create 2 birds with flying, and I take an extra turn. Something nice about Alrund's Epiphany is that it has foretell. I can foretell it early in the game for 2, and then cast it later. But its mana value is still 7. So again, I can cast it for 6 later in the game, and then still get 7 goblins from it anyway. Extra turns are nice. When you're doing Izzet things, you just sometimes need an extra turn. Maybe that just means an extra combat in order to swing goblins, but an extra turn spell is a really great way to keep your game going. This deck doesn't really go infinite. It just goes enough to go over the top. I have really loved Amanatu's Augury. It costs 8. It lets you look at the top 8 cards of your deck, and then get 1 of each type. You'll notice that although I do have quite a bit of instant and sorcery synergy, that I've got enchantments and artifacts and creatures in this deck too. I've got a little bit of everything, and Amanatu's Augury is going to help me hit all of it. I can put a land card from among them onto the battlefield, and then until end of turn, for each non-land card type, I may cast a card of that type from among the exiled cards without paying its mana cost. This isn't just putting things on the battlefield, I am actually casting them, which means Ovika will see those casts, and I will still get goblins for all of the cards that I cast for free without paying their mana cost. So I can get an enchantment, an artifact, a creature, a land, I can an instant, and a sorcery. This deck doesn't have any planeswalkers, but I can still get 1 of each of those other items. So, and not to mention that it costs 8. I'm going to get 8 goblins from it too. Amanatu's Augury is another overperformer in this deck. If you don't have a board, but you have 8 mana and Amanatu's Augury, you can kind of create an instant board state with all the goblins you'll get from all your free spells, as well as, whatever 5 free spells you get. So Amanatu's Augury, another overperformer in this deck. I do have Double Vision. This is a 5 mana enchantment. Whenever you cast your first instant or sorcery spell each turn, copy that spell, and you can choose new targets for the copy. I'm not going to say no to copying Amanatu's Augury if it's the first spell I cast, or copying Alrund's Epiphany, or even copying Mystic Confluence, or copying Rapid Hybridization. It simply is just good no matter what to get a spell for free. Even though copies aren't cast and I'm not going to get the goblins from the Double Vision spell, I'm still going to get the value of the spell that I'm casting. So no downside really for Double Vision. I have an Expropriate. I managed to pull it from the list. I think at the time I pulled it, it was more expensive. I think it was worth about $30 then. But it looks like it has gone down. So Expropriate, this is one of those boogeyman cards. It has assault score on EDH Rec. A lot of people don't like it, but sometimes you just need to close out. And if this is one of those cards that's going to get people to fold, that's going to get people to concede, that counts as a win. So 7 blue. This is a 9 mana spell. So I'm going to get my 9 goblins. And then Council's Dilemma. Starting with you, each player votes for time or money. For each time vote, take an extra turn after this one. For each money vote, choose a permanent owned by the voter and gain control of it. And then you exile it. When you play Expropriate, you, the player playing it, you should pick time. Obviously, you're going to get the extra turn from it because you don't need to gain control of something that you already control. Most of the time, your opponents will choose money, that you can take one thing from them. But it is not uncommon in my particular group, in my meta, for them to pick time also. It's almost always an escape, it's almost always a mistake. They say, well, time is just drawing a card, another combat phase, and another untap phase. But listen, the one who spends the most mana in a game of Magic is usually the person who wins. So an extra turn, being able to untap all my mana, draw another card, and go again, especially in a deck with lots and lots of hasty goblins, an extra turn is almost always going to put me over the top within range to win. I have Karn's Temporal Sundering. This is another extra turn spell. Target player takes an extra turn after this one. Return up to one target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. I like it. I like that it's a removal spell also. That I get an extra turn, and I put somebody else behind. It costs 6, so you get 6 goblins with it. It is a legendary sorcery. You can only cast it if you control a legendary creature or planeswalker. Well, this deck only works if Ovika's out anyway. So the rest of it's not really going to matter. I think that might even be my only legendary creature in the deck. Yeah, that's right. The only other creatures were Goblin, Electromancer, and Archmage Emeritus. So I have to have Ovika out in order to cast Karn's Temporal Sundering at all. Metallurgic Summonings could probably come or go. It's 5 mana, and it says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you create an XX colorless construct artifact creature token. So I create a creature token where X is the spell's mana value. I really have it in here for its second ability. You can pay 5 and exile it from your battlefield to return all instant and sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand. It says activate only if you control 6 or more artifacts. That's probably not going to be a problem. I have 20-something artifacts as my ramp spells, and so hitting the artifact requirement is probably not going to be an issue. But if I have managed to cast some great instants and sorceries, and I still haven't managed to go over the top and win, Metallurgic Summonings can help me do it. It can help me get some of those great cards back. Mind's Desire. Kind of like when I started this big spell section, I said your big spells almost don't matter. It almost doesn't matter what they are. And Mind's Desire kind of demonstrates that. It costs 6. It says shuffle your library, then exile the top card. Until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. It doesn't matter what top spell I get. You know, it doesn't matter what comes up at the top of the deck. As long as it's something big, then I can make goblins and I can win with those. Ovika creating those goblins really is a win condition on its own. So as long as I'm casting spells, Mind's Desire can help me cast more. So that's that. Reinterpret is a counter spell, and I can cast a spell from my own hand. It's 2 blue, red, counter target spell. You may cast a spell with an equal or lesser mana value from your hand without paying its mana cost. I am still casting it, so I will still get goblins. Swarm Intelligence is like Double Vision, except it's not just the first one. It's any instant or sorcery spell, and then you can copy it. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. It costs 7 mana. Again, these high mana costs don't matter to me. I have plenty of ramp in the deck that's going to help me get to it, especially if I can hit Ashnod's Altar and start using goblins to generate mana. I'm going to be fine with all of these high mana value cards. Swarm Intelligence lets me copy all of my instants and sorceries. Volcanic Vision has been an all-star board wipe in this deck. It costs 7. Return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. And then Volcanic Vision deals damage equal to that card's mana value to each creature your opponents control. So not only do I get a card back, say I get Amanatu's Augury. Amanatu's Augury does not exile itself. I am remembering correctly. So I can get Amanatu's Augury back from my graveyard, back into my hand, and then I can deal 8 damage to everybody else's creatures. So these are just big spells. Extra turns, copying, getting free spells from my deck. like I said, it almost doesn't matter what these big spells are. They can be enchantments, they can be instants or sorceries. You could probably throw planeswalkers in here and make a planeswalker version of this deck and use your goblins for defense for your planeswalkers if you want. These are just the things that I had lying around. You know, my Expropriate wasn't being used in another deck already. My Amanatu's Augury wasn't being used in another deck already. So I threw them in here, and they have worked really, really well. I do have a small selection left of some win condition cards. Say I have some goblins, but I need help getting over the top. It's going to come up a lot that, because this is one of the main decks in our meta, one of the other members of my Mythical meta, his name's Randy, and he has Darien, King of Kieldor, which is famous for making tons of soldier tokens, sometimes up to 200 soldier tokens. I have to have a way to go over the top. I need a way to take my swarm, even if it's the same size, and still go over his swarm in some way. So the cards that I've put in my win condition category, that's what was kind of in my mind as I was thinking about these cards in this category. Boggart Shenanigans is an enchantment. This is an enchantment. It costs 2 and a red. Whenever another goblin you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may have Boggart Shenanigans deal 1 damage to target player. Say I've got Ashnod's Altar, I can be sacrificing goblins and pinging my opponents the entire time. So Boggart Shenanigan is a great win condition because I might not need the combat step at all. I might not need to worry about moving to combat or overcoming blockers if I can just kill them. If I can just kill them myself and use Boggart Shenanigans to ping my opponents down. I have Cavalcade of Calamity. I have been wanting a deck to use this card, and I am so excited that I found a good place for it. It's an enchantment from Ravnica. I don't remember if it was guilds or allegiances. This was the third return to Ravnica, right before War of the Spark. Costs 1 and a red. Whenever a creature you control with power 1 or less attacks, Cavalcade of Calamity deals 1 damage to the player or planeswalker that creature is attacking. It means that all of these goblins, all of these 1/1 hasty goblins that I have, they don't have to get through they don't have to get through blockers. They can just attack, and Cavalcade is going to deal their damage whether they got through the blockers or not. So even if they all die on attack, they still manage to deal the damage that they would have, and so it doesn't matter if they live. I do have Cone of Cold. This is a really cheap card, 11 cents, 35 cents. It's an uncommon from Baldur's Gate, from Commander Legends Baldur's Gate. It costs 3 and a blue, and no matter what you roll, it says you roll a d20, no matter what you roll, you tap all creatures your opponents control. That's just really good. If I have a huge swarm with lots of goblins, I need to get through no matter what my opponent's army is. So if Randy's Darien King of Kieldor deck has 200 soldiers, it simply doesn't matter because I can tap all of them and he won't be able to block anyway. So that's why it's there. Its other role effects are just all good. They're just all good. So there's no way I can lose with this card. 1 through 9 is tap all creatures your opponents control. 10 through 19 is tap all creatures you control, and they don't untap during their controller's next untap steps. If I manage to somehow not win after playing Cone of Cold, maybe they don't get to untap their armies anyway. And then there is the critical hit 20 effect. Those creatures don't untap until your next turn. Creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, which means I'm going to get a second round where I can swing with impunity again. I do have Goblin Bombardment in this deck. So I've got Ashnod's Altar that I can use to sacrifice them, and of course Goblin Bombardment itself. I can sack a creature, Goblin Bombardment deals 1 damage to any target. So if I have enough goblins, then I can just get rid of my opponent's life totals however I want using Goblin Bombardment. I can use it for creature removal, but usually I'm just throwing my goblins directly at my opponent's faces. I do have a Mystical Tutor and a Solve the Equation. These cards are basically the same. They say search your library for an instant or sorcery card. A Mystical Tutor says reveal it, put that card on top. Solve the Equation says it goes directly into your hand. But I'm going to use Mystical Tutor or Solve the Equation in order to hit probably one of my big spells, usually Aminatu's Augury or Expropriate or Karn's Temporal Sundering, or I might use it to grab Cone of Cold or Surge to Victory, these other instances sorceries that can help me win and close out the game. I have Outpost Siege. It's an enchantment for 3 and a red, and it's good no matter what mode I choose. The top mode, Cons, says at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library, and until end of turn you may play that card. So it's kind of like a card draw spell. It's kind of like wiretapping, where I can see my top card and have access to an extra card each turn. Its second choice, Dragons, says whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, Outpost Siege deals 1 damage to any target. So, Outpost Siege is, or can be, another copy of Boggart Shenanigans. Anytime one of my creatures dies, I can deal damage to an opponent. So Outpost Siege is good either way. And my last effect that I have yet to win with, but I think will be so cool, it'll be kind of an achievement unlocked opportunity whenever I finally get to play it. It's called Surge to Victory. You exile an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard, and creatures you control get plus X plus O until end of turn, where X is that card's mana value. Don't forget that it costs 6. That means I can create 6 goblins. Even if I have no other goblins on board, I can create 6 hasty goblins with this card, immediately give them that buff, and swing with them that turn. It says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player this turn, copy the exiled card, and you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. Imagine the magical Christmas land, where I can play Surge to Victory, exile Aminatu's Augury from my graveyard, give all of my goblins plus 8 plus O, because that's Aminatu's Augury mana cost. They swing in, and then I get, a conservative estimate, 4 copies of Aminatu's Augury. I can cast those copies without paying their cost. I'm just flooded with more and more goblins. Oh, I cannot wait for the opportunity to win someday with Surge to Victory and to just overflow the board with my Izzet deck, doing Izzet things with just nonstop spells. This deck does not go infinite, but it does go enough. It will often go far enough in traditional Izzet fashion where I'll just get an overwhelming amount of value and I'll be able to overwhelm my opponents in that way. I hope that you enjoyed my Ovika Enigma Goliath deck. I've played it 2 or 3 times at the shop with strangers. Strangers get mad at me when I play this deck. I don't think that's a surprise because once it gets going, especially with enough card draw, like I said, the turn just gets longer and longer until I win. Whenever I show this deck to a stranger, I say, look, it runs on Ovika the commander. If the commander is out on the board, then this deck will run away with it. You've got to be able to get rid of it. You need to save removal for it. It has ward, so you need to be ready to pay extra for your removal spells and pay that 3 life, or try to make me sacrifice it before I can get any extra goblins out. It's really important to get Ovika off the board if you want to stand a chance against this deck. My own playgroup has seen this deck a couple times now, so they know that Ovika is how it runs. I didn't particularly go over the land package. I've got a 36 land package here, 15 islands, 14 mountains. I got a command tower. Cascade Bluff came in the New Capenna commander decks. I think the only The only land that's really important or that matters in this deck, I think, is Reliquary Tower, making sure that you have no maximum hand size. And even that's not super important. You kind of just need it if you ever want to hit the Hideaway card off of wiretapping. But the rest, I've got a Spirebluff Canal, I have a Temple of Epiphany, which is a Scry dual land. I have no idea why this Volatile Fjord here. The mana deck really doesn't... Excuse me, the mana base really doesn't matter in this deck because the ramp base is so robust. 22 spells that can help me generate mana of any color. So it simply doesn't matter what lands you pick. As long as you can generate blue and red mana on curve, you should be fine. Don't forget to check out Eldorado Gaming's home website, eldoradogaming.com. We are also available at just about every social media there is. We've got Facebook. If you're watching this, then you've already found our YouTube channel. We're on Twitter. We're on Threads. What else? Search Eldorado Gaming and you'll probably find us. I hope you enjoyed this deck. Like I said, if you decide to build a deck like this, tell me what changes you make. Maybe you don't go the instant and sorcery route like I did. Maybe you do the Planeswalker thing. Tell me. Leave a message in the comment, subscribe with your own suggestions on how you would build Ovika Enigma Goliath. I just fell in love when I saw this card, and knowing that it was only going to be 50 cents, 70 cents, this is a single that I bought because I wanted to build this deck. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you soon for the next one. Bye-bye.